Okay, let's move on to our last lecture in discussing style. So let me give you the screen. And here we are, um, Vincent Van Gogh here. Look at that. Remember, expressionistic, cool graphics. Here's a painting on the left, the big painting that I should have just left as it is because it's cool, but of course I covered it with a bunch of stuff. Anyhow, we're talking about abstraction. So, abstract art, it's work that depicts objects or images in a distorted or exaggerated or fundamentally non-naturalistic ways. So forms are changed. Remember we talked about the physics of the real world, like gravity can often be changed. Um, Varying degrees to emphasize certain qualities or content or subject matter. So the term abstraction alone implies there is a source or a subject. Now, that just means that there's a little kernel that's the start of everything, and then abstraction has come out of that kernel of a subject. So we'll see later on some work you could call not really abstract if it comes from nothing, so to speak. And this is an example of what I'm talking about. And here we go with Mondrian again. So some abstract work just communicates emotion or concept or composition of shapes. And contrary to popular notions, abstract art has been with us since we've been humans. We could say that there's been some abstract components of the art of nearly every time in culture. And I'll say maybe an exception is the Renaissance. But here, a thousands-year-old cave painting, abstraction happening, emphasis on certain parts of the faces. Um, changes in the sizes to the specific elements on faces. So we see all kinds of abstraction happening in before ancient art. So it's adding meaning to what's being representative when there is representation happening. Because we can have abstract art happening in two categories, and this I've alluded to. We've got representational abstraction and non-representational abstraction. So if you remember, with naturalism, we only had representation. With abstraction, we can have representation or something that is not representing anything. So here's good examples. Here's Baccioni, and that's certainly representing the human form, and it's been abstracted. Below, we've got Mondrian yet again, and it's non-representational, right? There's no human form behind this sort of work or form of any other sort of realistic object. I'm sorry, I should say naturalistic object, right? So it might depict things in ways other than when we say them in order to understand them differently, either as discovery or as a statement. And we can see how Van Doesburg abstracted from an original naturalistic image and gradually pulled out the structure of the image of the subject and ended up with the painting at the bottom. So up at the top, you can see the naturalistic drawing, and then he starts to pull out elements and shape things and gradually build to this final painting, which is essentially just squares and rectangles and colors. Similarly with Picasso, just a sketch up above and then gradually building to an endpoint. So I want to start with Cubism. And here's Picasso, a Demoiselle d'Avignon. This is actually a picture of prostitutes in a brothel. Um, Picasso's not known for being very pure, maybe. Um, he, he was kind of a character. But so Cubism is the reconstruction of objects based on fragmented geometric abstraction. So it's analyzing subject matter and depicting it as faceted planar constructions. So it's a shallow space, right? We don't see a ton of depth. And it's showing more than one viewpoint simultaneously. So we're seeing faces from one side while we're also seeing a face from the other side. That's how you get noses, especially in the character sort of midway over to the right, the face there. You're seeing both the profile and the frontal view at once. And this is kind of interesting that there's a tie into physics here, because it was during these years that theoretical physics was really taking off. Einstein and the theory of relativity. Part of that is this notion that each of us, will just use humans, are in our own different time frame in space. And so when time frames intersect, then we're all seeing different angles of things. We're all seeing the world in our own particular way. And in that intersection, if we were to look at those intersections objectively, we might see a whole mashup of things happening. And so we could take that further with physics, but there's a lot of interesting things happening right at the turn of the century. A lot of relationship between science and art happening. And we could say that that runs from kind of mostly the 1900s to 1920. So mostly turn of the century to World War I. But we do see examples that go on to the 30s and even further, a different sort of abstraction. So this is another very popular example of his work. It's a portrait of his gallery dealer. But you can see here, if you look for a moment, you can see a face in the upper middle of the painting. And so you can really see what I'm talking about. You're seeing profile and frontal and even the other profile view all being mashed together at once. Um, and so we're seeing that throughout the painting. And down at the lower bottom, you can see the hands. So it's this very shallow space trying to depict everything all at once from every angle. Brock doing the same thing. This is a still life. You can see sort of the form of a bottle up on the upper left. How you're seeing the left side of it and the right side of it at the same time. Duchamp, nude descending a staircase. So this idea of frame dragging, and we're seeing time slow down, so we can see every faceted movement of what's happening of this figure coming down a staircase. So we're talking about motion, but being able to see that motion all at once. And this is 1912, right? This is way before the sort of film effects we're used to seeing now. Boccioni, unique forms of continuity in space. So we're seeing this figure moving through space, and we see the depiction of that movement happening in space. Here's back to the Picasso sequence. And you can see at the bottom um, is over on this slide. So this is Guernica. It's about a town that was bombed relentlessly during World War II in Spain. Um, this is a little bit more of a sort of plastic cubism, right? We're seeing the say frontal and side views all together, like the figure laying lower left. We're seeing that all mashed together, but they're not in these geometric planes, so they're more organic in a way. And it's the depiction of the horrors of war that these people are going through. So it's really kind of a scary image. I guess that there's a large image of this in the United Nations building, and they'll cover it up during times of worldwide strife, just because they don't want this image to be sort of representing the UN. Look at that, 11 feet 5 inches tall and 25 feet long. Rather large painting. So I was talking about that kind of plastic cubism. Um, I really dig Leger. We can see everything's being kind of smashed in. There's still that very shallow space. Everything is smashed flat, and it's very organic. While at the same time, there are geometric forms being presented as well, as a nice contrast to the organic forms, shapes. So let's move on to surrealism, which which in some ways takes off from cubism, and you can see there's that same sort of smashed or warped organic forms happening here. And it's really, you could say it's from about 1915 to 1945, mostly from the 30s to 1945-ish. But this coincides with the developing science or study of psychology. And that's where you see a lot of this dreamlike imagery coming from. So this is all about combining and juxtaposing familiar objects to create new images that play on psychology. Comes out of absurdism, Dadaism, and Cubism. So absurdism and Dadaism, we've looked at images of Dadaism before. So it's randomness, just throwing objects together and seeing what shows up. But this takes it in sort of a different direction and tries to link that up with psychology. So not just for the sake of randomness, for the sake of new perception of things in the world. And you'll see it as either whimsical or disturbing, and it'll borrow styles from naturalistic work and cubism, as I've mentioned. But physics isn't really working here. Obviously, in this particular picture, there's not much happening from real life. There's a face here and there. Um, This guy's work I really love, De Chirico, Melancholy and Mystery of a Street, 1914. And what I like about this is how, first of all, the space is set up. If you look at the wagon in the foreground, its perspective lines are going way off to the left, while the perspective lines of the building are going way off to the right. The building in the foreground, way off to the left. So it's kind of this skewed space. And then you've got this child who's playing with her hoop, going down this road, and there's a sort of ominous figure coming into the road. So again, linked up with psychology, a little bit of fear, a lot of mystery happening here. And here's a later De Chirico. We can say that we can see that things turn way more towards abstraction. Again, with those organic forms and a lot more references to maybe what's going on in the mind's eye. Miro, this is kind of all over the place. You guys got to watch this about Miro. So um, definitely watch that. Dolly. So this is a lobster phone, right? So we're taking something we use for communication, and it's sort of intimate even. Like you put a phone right up to your face and on your ear. But then a lobster on top, which is something that most of us would probably never put on our face. And so it's there for the sense of grossness, right? It's to be shocking, and at the same time, sort of mentally disturbing, even. Of course, his most famous image, The Persistence of Memory. A lot of you have probably seen this ad nauseum. Um, a lot going on. Interesting perspective things happening, the warping of time being illustrated, um, all kinds of stuff happening here. Um, the ants down on the clock, down on the lower left, sort of eating away at time. There's a fly on the clock right above that. And so time is ticking one way where the fly is, and then you see the hand pointing straight down and is flipping another way straight down. You guys got to watch this. Um, it's totally nuts. You have to see the eye scene. This will freak you out. So just watch it from the beginning for a little while. It's just nuts. But watch the eye scene, right? Just do it. Magritte, this sort of sophisticated surrealism. This is a picture of a pipe, and this says "Say na pay and pipe." So there's a picture of a pipe, and then it says this is not a pipe, right? So it's negating itself. More Magritte you might be more familiar with. Merritt Oppenheim. Here's our fur-covered cup. Again, the sense of kind of grossness of actually putting this up to your mouth and drinking tea out of it. Here we have actual real texture, of course. Kind of after surrealism, and you got to realize that all of these styles within, well, you know already, within naturalistic work and now within abstract work, it's not like a hard cut in time and things just switch styles. There's these sort of gray areas where things are starting to intermingle. Um, so they take sort of the mood aspect of surrealist work and kind of move it beyond representation. Late 1940s, generally, they explored kind of the essence of subject matter and its mood and integrate their own mood without really regards to the final product appearing naturalistic itself. Mood, expression of feelings through the action of painting in a lot of cases. So that's why it's expressionistic. Um, and broad fields of color are often there. This is de Kooning. And we've already seen some de Kooning when we were talking about gestural lines. Here we've got an early Jackson Pollock. And so you can see these sort of nascent bits of Cubism in here still, a little bit of Surrealism, and it's all kind of getting combined. And this is before we saw his crystallographic works. So there's definitely space happening here. And somewhere in abstract expressionism, um, a lot of art becomes non-objective. So everything we've looked at before is pictorial, right? It's representing something, right? It's take a bottle on a table and show it as either naturalistic or idealized or whatever, or show it as cubism or whatever. We were looking into a window. We were looking at a picture, all right? So this new work that arrives is projecting itself outward. It's not a picture anymore. It is a record of the action. So we might call this still abstract expressionism, but I personally, as a painter, I have to sort of identify my work as abstract, but I'm not really making work that abstracts from a source. I'm making work that's more like this, where it's projecting out its selfness, right? It's again, We're not looking into the painting to try to see an image. We're trying to see what the image does to us outwardly, or rather not the image, but the work itself projects outwardly. Do you guys get that? Like all this previous work, you're looking at pictures of things. Now we are just looking at pure brushstrokes that aren't pictures of things anymore. In fact, the way that I understand it, a lot of Franz Klein's work, and that's the artist shown here, he would talk on the telephone and doodle and scribble on a piece of paper next to him on the telephone. And then he would take that piece of paper over to a projector and hone in on a little tiny piece of that scribbling and blow it up, project it up, and then use that as the basis for a very large painting. So, non-representational art. So we could also call this non-objective. So, so this is the non-representational part of abstraction, just like I just described with Klein. We're not presented with visual forms that have a source material. We are presented visual forms with no specific representations or references outside of themselves. Um, there's an absence of subject matter in the traditional sense. Um, it's not representational. Again, remember that. Line, shape, texture, space, color, form, elements are used to express an idea in visual form. So non-representational abstraction seems to be making the thing itself. The artwork is itself. It's not an image or representation in non-representational art. Look at the spelling of non-representational art. That's really a typo. Um, and I'm kind of hitting this on the head over and over again because I really want you guys to be able to make that distinction that abstraction can be either representational or non-representational. Yes, more examples of abstract art that is probably not representational, but it comes from an older culture than us. I don't know personally. This may be representational. A lot of pattern work is. But to my uneducated eye, it looks non-objective. I always come back to Mondrian, right? It's one of our hallmark paintings, that and the Van Eyck painting, right? So Mondrian's work presents this idea of universalism. So, and this is very closely associated with the Bauhaus. And the idea with the Bauhaus is this belief that all humans have these specific forms that they like seeing, and it unites humans. And so the Bauhaus was trying to find these perfected structural forms that would work for everyone, and that's universalism. Um, it did not have an association really with religion, but it is close to existentialism in a way, that it's this belief that everyone is connected, but not necessarily by religion, more by the way the world is organized in terms of visual culture. Pollock again, here the later work that has that crystallographic structure. Obviously, we're not seeing, again, the still life bottle being depicted. This is an awesome video too. You have to watch this. It actually shows Pollock working and painting. You just totally have to watch this video. More Klein work. One of my favorites is the English artist Patrick Heron. He was an abstract expressionism. We might call this color field abstract expressionism because there is sort of this unifying yellow-green happening as a background to these other shapes happening. Helen Frankenthaler, another color field abstract expressionism. These are giant watercolor paintings. Rothko, right? Like beyond abstraction, totally non-objective. Very large paintings meant to influence the room they're sitting in. They project outward into space, and I'm kind of hitting this on the head again. Representational works create a window, a picture. Non-representational works do not create a window or a picture. So you can see how these works, when they're put into a room like this, they change the mood of the whole room. Right? They influence the flavor of the whole room. These are mostly black paintings. Kind of post-abstract expressionism, we see a bit more reductivism and structuralism coming into play. So this is Demon Corn, and he's sort of bringing in a kind of representation. So they think his work is based on street grids, but really maybe it just seems like it's street grids. He didn't say that. Um, but you see there's a lot more structure happening here. Um, Sort of like the way that Mondrian really kind of structured his paintings, but you can see there's a whole different approach to the way the paint is put on and how it relates to other painted areas. So this is an era where there's a little bit more individualized directions, and they head off into minimalism, a more true reductivism, and beyond from the 1960s onward. Albers was a color theorist um, who I disagree with on some of his color theory stuff. I'm working on a book right now that kind of rivals what has written, did write. But these are big paintings. They do the thing. They project out into the space. They don't have that kind of expressionistic tendency that the abstract expressionist work had. This is pretty minimal right here. If you look really closely though, you can see that in the middle of the painting, there's a giant eye. It goes from top to bottom. So you can see there's this just tiny change in color. And that's kind of the only variation happening within the painting. So this is kind of minimalistic, where it's just trying to show the essence of what a painting is. You know, only the thingness of this individual painting. We could call this post minimal. It has derivations from what's perfect. So we saw the last slide, the Reinhardt slide, and everything was like really perfect, perfect, perfect. Well, this kind of speaks to the same ideas of what a painting is in itself, but in this individualized pursuit that Ryman has, we see brushstrokes again, right? There are not these perfected lines that are what minimalism is all about. So you see a work like this, where you can see brushstrokes like this, or any other kind of non-perfect structure. Um, it's not really correct to call it minimalist. So that's where I get back to my own work again, is my latest work is post-minimal. It's more on this track than it is on old abstraction. Contemporary abstraction then takes off into its own sort of self-obsessive and reflective nature. This guy has cool work, especially something like this. So this is a crappy picture. Ritchie builds paintings that are three-dimensional. In other words, so part of it is painted directly on the wall of the gallery, and then the other part creeps onto the floor. So you see it's like occupying three dimensions, not just the 2D space of the one wall. David Reed, I really like his work. Okay, so here are those types that we covered of abstract art. There's representational abstraction, which is kind of an umbrella term, right, for Cubism, Surrealism, and most abstract expressionism. And then we've got that other category of non-objective work, which may also include minimalism and post-minimalism, and then certainly that later abstract expressionism that we looked at. So I want to give a note about this term that we hear a lot. And I want to simplify it for you. And I'm not going to show you any other images than this. Maybe I will later, but I think this is a great example. Postmodern, it's that individual pursuit of art in any style the artist chooses to convey any message or meaning that they like. So if we think about the Bauhaus, sort of everyone was working towards the same goal of universalism. Postmodern is all about not universalism. So it's this individual's message, and it's whether it's painting or installation work, so that's a type of sculpture, or architecture, it just means that it's an individual pursuit, regardless of style, right? The artist chooses any style they want, and they convey anything that they want. It's really pretty much as simple as that. It's not this massive mystery word. Here's the thing though, in general, artists who are considered postmodern may not follow precepts such as universalism, and that's what I mentioned. Own goals, independent of popular style. We often see this sort of broken modernism or broken organization, and that's why we call it postmodern. And so you can see this Frank Gehry building up above the Bilbao Museum. It looks like it's partially collapsed, right? So it doesn't have any of the sort of perfection of modernism. It doesn't have any Mondrian-ness to it. It's just sort of this individual architect's conception of what a museum should be. But that first paragraph here, the first few sentences, is really important. One artist, their own style, and their own message. Okay, let's look at this updated mini timeline. About 1300 to 1600, we've got Renaissance and idealism. Then we've got Romanticism and realism and Cubism and futurism, kind of kind of Dada and Surrealism, and we could all kind of put that under the umbrella of kind of seeking for a universal message for kind of a lot of audiences. After World War II, that's when we see things kind of switch over to self-expression in a much more major way, where we've got abstract expressionism and minimalism, and then finally postmodernism, which is that sort of individuation from about 1960 to the contemporary. Okay, that's it. See you in the next.